Sabrina 70s comic issue 10. We start out seeing Sabrina walk out of a movie theater. She notices it's snowing when she didn't wear boots, and uses magic as she thinks that the leading man looked good. She gets the attention of some mortal, and she uses magic on the snow to melt it. The mortal actually has a thought bubble about this, and tries to become involved in the story. So this is a deconstruction of how the witch characters don't even try to hide their powers in front of civilians in this comic. Now one of them's actually going to get involved instead of just staring. He thinks that with his managing, he could turn that trick of hers into $1 million contract. If he was smart, he'd realize that someone as all-powerful as that wouldn't have to do anything he wanted. He tells Hilda after following her home that he'd like to speak to Sabrina. Hilda lies, and then uses magic on the guy when he plans on calling Sabrina a witch in his act. I guess she erased his memory and that's all, but all I can see is her warping him into oblivion. That's a little overkill. She calls out Sabrina on her mistake, and reveals that she turned the man into a snowman, rather than just leaving it at erasing his memory. But he'd ring their doorbell right afterwards asking why he was there. And she didn't know where he lived, so she couldn't warp him home. Sabrina runs out of the house because she doesn't want him to melt as a snowman thanks to her. Couldn't she just warp him to her? Well, I guess she doesn't remember exactly what he looks like because she only saw him like once. They find sled tracks in the snow, and it turns out some kids stole the snowman. One of them accidentally pushes the snowman on a sled, and it goes downhill, so the kids decide to go see if the sled broke. And because of Hilda, they see the guy from earlier, and surprisingly the story ends without the kids realizing what happened, even though one of them points out that that's their snowman's hat and muffler, and the guy thinks he has to tell the doctor about his hallucinations. Wait, the story's over? That was it? That story wouldn't have happened. Hilda would have just erased his memory, not turned him into a snowman. In the comedy page, Hilda complains that with the long line at the post office, the Christmas package to her aunt will never arrive in time. Isn't it weird for Hilda to deal with something the mortal way, and Sabrina to be the first one to think to just make the package fly? Why didn't they just teleport the package? Whenever one of Sabrina's family members is mentioned, it's always a witch one. The package could be seen on the way to her aunt's house. So, why didn't it get teleported to her? Did her aunt just move? And nobody had her new house memorized? But if she didn't really remember what a new house looked like, then she wouldn't know how to get the package to land at the right house anyways. Well, at least the spell isn't as bad as Hilda using magic to cut in line like I thought would happen. Hilda could have brainwashed people in line into getting out of line for her. In the next story, I'm confused right away as Sabrina is casually telling Della, the head witch, who wants her to be evil, that her life is dull and she expects too much. It's like they're best friends now, despite their completely opposite worldviews and roles. Sabrina gets advised to use magic to make Harvey not dull anymore. And Sabrina says she doesn't want to use her witch powers and wants to be normal. But she uses magic at every opportunity. She's hypocritical about this. Della says she resents the implication, and asks Sabrina if she doesn't think witches are normal. But they aren't. Why would you think they are? I thought she was proud of the fact that they were paranormal. Sabrina, surprisingly right away, admits that she's the one who's not normal, compared to other witches, true. And Della tells her she's just being silly by making life complicated, immediately dropping being offended. It'd make more sense if Sabrina said that she won't use magic to make Harvey not dull because that'd be brainwashing and that's wrong. Della thinks they're all rebels these days. So good, it's not just Sabrina. She assumes Sabrina does want to zing life into Harvey. So she casts a spell on Harvey to make him have a lot of charisma. But this immediately screws up, as it gets girls other than Sabrina to fall for him. And Della doesn't realize this is a bad idea that would immediately upset Sabrina. Right away, Sabrina gets affected by the charisma after she notices Harvey, rather than lecturing Della to undo her spell. I mean, she was trying to help Sabrina, so she would make her happier too. And I guess Della really thinks that part of making Harvey a great guy is making him disloyal to Sabrina, as she's told to wait her turn and called a kid. I guess it's all part of the spell that Sabrina's still in love with Harvey after this, and says he's gonna love her if she has to zap him into it. It's certainly more exciting to have a recurring female antagonist that's actually a witch. Out of complete nowhere, Sabrina misses Harvey with her love spell, and hits some random man with it. and then her over-the-top undue love spell hits a dog instead. Why would she have to aim it? Wouldn't her magic know what target she meant because to be in contact with her mind? Because she'd be imagining what she wants to happen? Dell finds this funny, and the story ends with Sabrina turning her into a cat that's black and white just like Salem from the 90s comic. But it wasn't as satisfying as it could have been because I'm supposed to think she simply missed, instead of intentionally punishing Della after seeing her. At least Della thinking she did it by accident explains why she didn't punish Sabrina for it. That story wouldn't have happened either. In the next story, Sabrina's told by the principal that she's doing a good job decorating the school in a Christmas way. What's that? There's actually a story taking place in the school? A huge amount of panels are wasted with Harvey asking for decorations one at a time and being told no. Then he asks for mistletoe, and the story ends with her zapping a huge amount of it into the room and expecting a kiss instead of him freaking out at all that mistletoe out of nowhere. In the next comedy page, Sabrina tells Hilda that the kids with the long list can hold up the mall Santa line for hours. Sabrina is cathartically asked, "If it bothers you so much, why don't you do something about it?" She ends the story creating another mall Santa to speed things up. I guess she also rewrote the memories of everyone here to make them not question this and get the extra mall Santa hauled off by security. In the next page, Archie can't go skating with Sabrina because he has to wrap all the presents. Sabrina pities him and casts a spell asking friendly spirits to wrap all the presents for him. At least there are friendly spirits. Unfortunately, somehow, all the presents end up wrapped into the same one gift. She wouldn't imagine it like that. So that wouldn't happen. It didn't actually help him, so how was that satisfying? In the next story, we start out seeing Ambrose asking warlocks to unite. And Sabrina says, "Don't tell me Cousin Ambrose is off again." Well, it's interesting seeing the side of him, if off-putting. I thought he was just a boring, redundant, nice person. Hilda says that he's caught up in this men's liberation thing, as I'm wondering why she's doing the dishes the old-fashioned way instead of casting a spell to wash them all instantly. Ambrose complains that it's about time warlocks struck off the chains that keep them from taking their rightful place in the world of witchcraft. He reveals that witchcraft is dominated by women, and warlocks don't have equal rights. That's interesting. Sabrina reminds him, "You're a warlock! You've got the power! Just turn yourself into a woman!" This makes Hilda start laughing, and he says that's not the answer to the problem. Would she say this if it was the women who were the victims instead? Hilda says they've got enough fat witches as it is, and I guess Ambrose is so used to jokes about it that he doesn't care enough to react. Somehow there's a bunch of time wasted after Ambrose tries to prove himself to Sabrina and asks some mortals what is a witch. Archie and Jughead thinks the Who's on First game at first. Somehow. And then they have no idea what a warlock is. And they don't believe him about there being male witches. I guess they haven't experienced nearly enough fantasy. Ambrose says that this is exactly his point, and wants Sabrina to observe as warlocks meet and shake witchcraft to its core. At first the men are mad at seeing Sabrina because she's a girl, but fortunately they immediately stop hating her when Ambrose says she can mediate for them. Sabrina doesn't like the warlocks saying that they're badder and eviler than the witches, and comes up with a plan. She pretends to be on their side, and reminds them of the Salem witch trials, and scares them into losing their resolve and running away by saying that this time men will burn for their cause instead of women. So in Sabrina's universe, people were burned in Salem instead of simply hanged. The story ends with all the men running away in fear, and insulting Ambrose for being a troublemaker. That was smart of Sabrina. She could have just wasted time lecturing them instead. In the next comedy page, a door-to-door vacuum salesman walks into Hilda's house. She actually agrees to use the vacuum. She flies away on the vacuum. The story ends with them fainting as she says that her broom is quiet and doesn't have a cord to get tangled. In the next actual story, Harvey runs into Sabrina's house excited for a date and then gets disappointed because she's going to be gift wrapping all day. He says that he's a terrible gift wrapper, which is at least a good excuse. She uses magic to wrap them all up and insists on walking out with them without erasing his memory. So he says that she's got to be the fastest rapper ever. So when Archie says that Betty got a job gift wrapping at Stacy's, Harvey says Sabrina could do a better job and challenges Archie to a wrap-off. Sabrina tells him to stop this, but doesn't just use her magic. Betty says she doesn't want to compete, and yet she's gonna do it anyways. Without her magic, Sabrina sucks at gift wrapping, and Harvey gets mad at her, calling her a joker and refusing any apology for making a fool out of him. Instead of erasing his memory, she uses magic to have him all wrapped up to humiliate him again. So she'd have to erase his memory of that too. The story wouldn't have happened. A lot of the stories in this issue wouldn't have. The first story was about a mortal witnessing Sabrina melt snow with magic, and then some realistic consequences actually come of it. As he follows her home, and Hilda finds out. So she turns him into a snowman, and to make the plot more interesting, the snowman gets put on a sled by some kids and sent downhill before Hilda finally turns it back to normal. Was that really all the story was? It was a deconstruction of what happens all the time in these comics with no consequences. But it ended so soon. Hilda would have erased his memory, not turned him into a snowman. The second story has Della use magic to make Harvey irresistible to women because she assumes that's what Sabrina wants. Why was she meddling in her life? And she only gets comeuppance by accident, because Sabrina kept somehow missing her spells, instead of instantly reversing Della's spell. Probably because Della's spells are more powerful. It was so confusing that the story started with Sabrina casually telling her worst enemy that her life was boring as if they're friends, which is the whole reason this story happened. Then after a story where Sabrina zaps up tons of mistletoe for Harvey right in front of him, there's a story that does nothing but waste her time, and its only contribution is that it develops on the lore of the witch world a little, as warlocks are dominated by the female witches. And Ambrose finally adds something to his character that makes an impression, because he's really upset about it and wants to change things. It immediately reminds you of the men's rights jerks, but all the story was trying to do was portray them as role-reversed feminists. And the only reason they were in the wrong then was because witches are stereotyped to be evil, and somehow they want to be even eviler. You'd think most witches would want to fight against the stereotype, not embrace it. It's the whole reason Sabrina makes so much sense. Dale even said that Sabrina's rebelliousness as a witch is a lot more common than it's been treated as, which was encouraging. They really are using the new witch movement idea. The final story is a frustrating one, where the whole conflict would be resolved immediately if Sabrina had a brain and just erased Harvey's memory of how she wrapped all the gifts with magic right away. That was insulting to my intelligence. And because of that nonsense, it has a frustrating ending where Harvey's mad at her for making him look like a fool in the gift wrapping contest with Betty, and she takes it out on him instead of making him forget things.